Well, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce our GOF speaker today. Irene Huang is the Assistant Chair of Architecture at the University of Michigan. She's worked in practice for over 15 years. She served as Director of Business Development for Deborah Burke and Partners in New York City. Before that, she was a Senior Communications Manager at KPF in New York and Director of Publications and Exhibitions at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. She also has served as a managing editor at Actar Publishers and a designer at Raphael Moneo's office. She's the author of the upcoming book, Get Practiced, Turn Your Architectural Education into a Career, which should be out next year with Routledge. And she's taught at Northeastern University in Barcelona, and now at University of Michigan. Irene holds a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Pennsylvania and a Master of Architecture with commendation from Harvard. So please, guys, help me welcome Irene by giving the thumbs up or the applause, either one.
Wow, that was so fancy. I have to tell you, I'm really excited to be here. I wish I was there actually in person, because the best thing about these events and about such an honor is I'm going to tell the students, and the faculty know this, but is the dinners and the kind of hanging out before and after. So I really appreciate you guys coming. And I just want to thank Marjorie Callahan for opening up her class. I think there's some of you guys that were in the class, and she really graciously opened up 3 whole sessions for the workshop. Of course, I want to thank Dr. Pilat, because Stephanie and I are colleagues through the Equity in Architecture Education Consortium. And also I want to thank Dean Butzer, because I know he's really set an incredible tone for you guys in terms of thinking about architecture as a social act. And of course, I want to just throw a shout out to Bruce Goff, because I think part of his inspiration in the everyday and thinking beyond the common, those are things that I think really resonate with what I've been looking at. And finally, I can't thank enough Olivia, who's my wonderful, esteemed graduate research assistant here, and also another graduate research assistant of mine, Akima, who has been really helping with the research that I'm going to present to you guys today. So my trajectory, Stephanie, thank you so much for all of those accolades. It kind of sounds amazing when it's all piled together. But when it actually happened, I was, pretty befuddled by everything. And I have to say, I really want to share with you guys a lecture today that is about the work that I'm looking at, which is, for the last, I guess, 15 years or so, I've been really, really interested in how architectural ideas, architectural thinking, architectural making, how that kind of connects with the world. So you'll see that in a couple of vignettes throughout the lecture. It's about an hour long. I'm happy to stop at certain parts. But I understand the kind of Zoom fatigue involved in this. So again, I just really want to thank you guys so much for joining. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free while this is all going on to use the stack. So I stack a lot, which is basically if you have a question or you're interested in saying something, I'd love to hear from you directly. So if you can just type in stack, Olivia and I will just keep track of it, and then we'll be able to ask you guys individually when you're ready to ask your question, if that makes sense. All right, so I'm gonna do the wiggle dance where I try to get my Adobe Acrobat to work, and then you guys are gonna just watch me click on buttons and be like, I don't know why that's not working. So we're gonna do that right now, and I'm like, why is it not advancing? So we're gonna take a couple minutes just to make sure that that works. So I'm gonna share my screen and hopefully get us started here. Okay. All right. I assume you guys can see the title page, correct? Thumbs up. Okay, title page. Next page. All right, awesome. So the title of this talk is really about, architecture and it not being a building. But what I wanted to start with you guys first is kind of thinking about public opinion. And for me, I really see public opinion, the kind of public sphere, as really the place where the battle for architectural values is happening. So I want to start off with a quote by Frank Lloyd Wright. So some of the students that were participating in Marjorie's class will be familiar with some of this material. So I thank you guys for revisiting it with me. But one thing in particular I like to think about is just the kind of tone of architecture. What is the public's understanding of architecture? And in particular, if we look to someone like Frank Lloyd Wright, it's really about noble life, noble demands, a kind of noble uses and noble men. So already we understand architecture, at least from the one of the most iconic members of the profession, at least in the public eye. We understand architecture to be something apart, right? Not something of the everyday, not something that is part of our everyday life, but rather a more elevated or distinguished practice. So in terms of architecture, how many of you guys know this building? It's the Sears Tower in Chicago, one of the tallest buildings. And how many of you guys know this building? It is the Burj in Dubai, again, now the tallest building in the world. And also, I show this image of Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. These are images that, maybe my Aunt Claire, if she looked at, if she conjured up the image of architecture in her mind, this is what she would think of, right? So, and I, as a younger person, when I started studying architecture, for me, it was kind of two things. It was either really fancy houses, or it was these amazing skyscrapers. And here you see the Roby House. And obviously, we know how it is fully architecture, and it's fully important when we see it rendered in Legos, right? So you have both Falling Water and the Roby House. But you also have architecture, the kind of iconography of architecture in movies and cinema. And so here you have King Kong, where you have the Empire State Building. So people understand these things, these extraordinary, completely uncommon architectures to be what architecture is, right? These buildings, these spectacularly unique and again, extraordinary buildings. Something like this, again, if I were to ask my Aunt Claire if she thought this was a unique building or not, she probably would say, looks like any other mid-century office building in New York. So how many of you guys have seen this building before? Do you know what this one is? Seagram's Tower by Mies van der Rohe. And as we who are studying architecture or scholars of architecture, we know this to be one of the most significant buildings produced by an architect in the 20th century. How many of you guys are familiar with this building? This is a Ford factory in OKC. And I bring this up because, again, not a lot of people would consider this architecture, right? And it's a factory actually designed by Albert Kahn, who was Ford's architect and one of the major architects in the Midwest during the early 20th and mid 20th centuries. And so I bring this particular example up not only because it's in Oklahoma City, but also because it recently got a facelift in the last sort of 5 years, right? So it went from being a Ford factory, it went from being not what one would consider architecture, even though it was the product and design and invention and delivery of architecture and of architects. But it wasn't until the 21C Museum Hotels, a boutique hotel chain founded by the heiress and I guess the husband and wife heiress of, I think, Jack Daniels or some very esteemed liquor company. But in any case, we look at the invention of Albert Kahn's columns, his hexagonal columns, and we see them transferred into these amazingly beautiful ballrooms with this incredible art installed on the terrazzo floor. But suddenly we've been architecture washed. So it is only until we have words like luxurious, boutique, museum, kick up a notch, center for culture, that we begin to understand a building like that as architecture. So reshifting again and thinking about the architect through that same lens. How many of us know this guy here or recognize him? We have Frank Lloyd Wright, the iconic gentleman at his drafting desk. We see him here surrounded by his disciples in an almost extraordinary genius, nearly kind of very symbolic photograph of him. And then we also, and these are from my kind of older colleagues, we have Mike Brady here from the Brady Bunch, also another version of what public opinion would consider to be an architect, or what public opinion would understand as an architect. How many of you guys know this guy? I had to look him up. So does he strike us as an architect? The black clothes might kind of give it away, but this is Adrian Smith, and he is the architect of the tallest building right now, which is the Burj, which we saw before. So you see him next to this. How many of us think these guys look like architects, or these guys conjure up the idea of what an architect is? We've got, you know, the roll of drawings over there, which is a dead giveaway. But on the left, you have Bruce Graham, and on the right, you have Fazlur Khan. And they are the architect and engineer of the Sears Tower. So in terms of the built environment, I want to shift gears a little bit again to thinking about this shaping of public opinion, or this shaping of public understanding of architects and architecture. And so I've done this where I've, you know, just kind of Googled built environment. And when I turn up some of the images that come into my Google browser, and this is also with the understanding that, you know, Google is biased to what I've been searching. But, you know, I'd ask you guys to do a search as well and see what turns up. But here we have Chicago. So when I type in the built environment, I see something like Chicago. This also is an image right next to the results for built environment, which is a typical suburban layout of a subdivision in the US. We also have this image, which I am unable to identify, but what is interesting about it is this is the built environment, right? And in neither of these three photos, or in the sort of pages of Google results that I was looking at, did they have anything like the Burj or the Sears Tower, or did they have anything that was indicated of these kind of extraordinary architectures or these extraordinary buildings, right? And so I guess for me, that always conjures up an idea of then who is actually shaping the built environment? Who is influencing the built environment? How is the built environment actually taking place? And again, because my research has led me to really start to posit the idea that architecture isn't actually that prevalent, and architecture isn't actually that available, I became really curious in the parties who were actually shaping public desire and public thought about architecture. So I propose it's these guys. How many of you guys watch HGTV, or have seen shows on home renovation, or maybe these shows were also the inspiration for you to come to architecture school or start to think about design? I started looking at HGTV because I enjoyed it so much, but yet part of me, as someone who's trained as an architect, was confused by that feeling. So I don't know how many of you guys enjoy it, but then secretly maybe don't agree with all the things that they espouse. But here we have, hosts like Mina Starsiak, we have Jasmine Roth, all in different cities across the United States. And I want to do a bit of a deep dive into a particular show, which is called Good Bones. And so this is Mina and her mom, and they renovate homes in Indianapolis, Indiana. And this is Mina with her husband. And the particular episode that I'm really interested in is one that is sharing Mina's forever home. So this is Mina's dream home. This is the home she chooses to build for herself. And this is the home she plans to stay in with her family forever. So here's the lot in Indianapolis, in an once more underdeveloped residential area, which is now one of the more recently popular areas in the city. And so Mina had bought this lot right next to her current home. This is her, this has been her neighborhood for a long time. And, she's been working on these floor plans for almost as long as she's owned the lot, and just been waiting for the right moment to build the house. And if you guys don't mind bearing with me, I'm going to play a little bit of a clip for you guys. There are a couple clips in this presentation, and I just want to make sure that you guys are okay watching each one of them. They're about a minute long each. So I'm going to hit play. Oops, I'm going to full screen it so you guys can see it, and I'll come back.
Want to see our next project? It's my forever home.
Every house needs a name, and this is the Taj from Mina.
So what do you think about having a baby? My whole vibe is Charleston inspired. Okay, you wanna go inside?
Yeah, I'm super ready. Holy Nike.
Mom and I take on some of the nastiest houses you've ever seen.
We're not afraid to tackle the worst of the worst.
That is so gross.
Holy cow.
Then we turn those rundown houses into some of the nicest homes in the neighborhood.
Wow.
I love it.
Okay, we're not going to watch it again, just mastering the PDF format. So here we have Mina on her cell phone in the episode talking about her main inspiration for what the project is. So she's really inspired by Charleston, South Carolina, which is where her and her family have vacationed a lot. It's where her and her husband go, and it's where her and her mom used to go. And so here she is explaining to a metal fabricator how much she loves the wrought iron fence and how she would like to also have one for their home, and how she's inspired by the airiness, the lightness, and the architecture of Charleston, South Carolina. And so again, this is their favorite. This is their favorite place to vacation, and the house that they're planning to build is going to be 2,900 square feet. So here again, you have an example of what we would call the Charleston single house, which is a very it's a typology that is ubiquitous for these 19th century, the 19th century fabric of Charleston. And so you have this as the inspiration, and then you have this as the sketch of Mina's house, the front elevation sort of rendering. And here you have the actual house itself. So what I wanted to bring with this comparison is simply the distortion that happens in Mina's house. We all kind of see the difference. And what you have here is, again, the development of a single house in Charleston that was devised through a series of architectural considerations. So for instance, the single house is skinny with the short side to the street because of the platting of Charleston. So unlike a city that is developed with kind of more regularly or squarely proportioned lots, Charleston had a platting or a city layout of lots that was very narrow and thin. Also, the climate of Charleston, you can see with this palm tree, is really different than in Indianapolis, Indiana. So temperatures rarely dip below sort of 50 degrees. In winter, you'll have highs of 60. So of course, the architecture of this typology is really meant in kind of pre-air conditioning days to bring air and circulation and light into the house, but at the same time sheltering it from the heat or this kind of moist climate. And again, occasionally you'll see a double house, which is more horizontal and facing the street. And you'll see the verandas, where in Charleston's climate is very important or crucial to create this link between the indoors and outdoors, depending on the time of day, and as an architectural way and means of dealing with the different climate. And so here also I wanted to point out is that what is interesting about Mina's house is that it is the result of an inspiration which would also inspire an architect, but the end outcome is something that is so distorted and so different in terms of scale and in terms of its performative capabilities that I like to highlight how also in this photo, there's a phenomenon happening here of the house being extremely bloated and out of scale compared to its neighboring house. And so when you look inside Mina's house, and sorry, these are a little bit blurry, but the screenshots are of when the camera is panning. But what you see inside is here you have the living room. To the right, you have the kitchen. And then behind you, behind the camera, you'll have the dining room. And they're all labeled like this, even though in actuality, what you have is a big open concept, a big open space, which HGTV has labeled open concept. And again, I think what this introduces are things like this zone here, where normally you would have a wall or you would have a transition or you would have some kind of visual and acoustic separation. But in the world of HGTV, where open concept is the best concept you can have and is the highest level of design, the response actually creates a completely empty space, and you have these dead spaces which suddenly cannot be used for infrastructure, they can't be used for any kind of systems, and they end up just being wasted dead space, right? So there's an inefficiency both in sort of program and in construction with the strategies promoted by HGTV. So again, you have the open concept, which is a very celebrated technique in HGTV. And I wanted to talk again about the kind of historical architectural development of open concept. So here you have an open concept house from the mid-century in California, again, a place with an entirely different climate. And what you'll see is that the open concept developed naturally out of the ranch houses, the dry climate and the hot sun of Southern California and the ranches that had been developed there, along with the materiality and the dryness of climate, which makes for an incredibly different demands placed on the envelope of the house. And so what you have is this relationship where the furniture almost fades away and the house itself becomes this backdrop. But it also isn't a blank backdrop. It is one that is providing multiple options for how you use the home and how you live in the home, as opposed to reducing the amount of options. And so again, if we revisit the view of Mina's open concept main public living area, we see to the right exactly what that leads to. And so again, you see these inefficiencies, you see these real distortions in the inspiration or the kind of legacy of these architectural innovations or architectural developments that really brought about a new way of living, a new way of relating to indoor and outdoor space. And here you have, again, a bloated house occupying almost the entire lot. And then what you're left with is this tiny sliver of outdoor space. Again, we have a recent renovation done by Marmol Ratzinger, architects in Los Angeles, to a case study house in Southern California. And here, again, you'll see things that are similar, right, to Mina's home in Indianapolis. You'll have open concept, you have the dining room flowing into the living room, public space, and again, you have indoor and outdoor space. But what you don't have is, again, this sense, this distorted sense of scale. So what you have here is that same relationship of indoor and outdoor, but yet you have a stair to the left and you have this very narrow, almost alley-like outdoor space to the right. How many of you guys are familiar with this image? Have you ever seen this before? I see Olivia raising her hand, but she sat through this lecture before, so she's definitely seen it. But I love this image. A colleague of mine and I, when we were sort of doing, I was sharing some of my research, we looked at this image and I flashed this image on my screen and he said, wow, that looks awesome. Like, I love the way that looks. And I'm gonna play another clip for you guys about the design and origin of this.
Kim Kardashian explains those interesting sinks in her bathroom.
Guys, do you mind if I take a look around?
Yeah, of course.
Great. What's the most important thing that you want your kids to know?
I want my kids to be kind and to treat everybody the same way.
But wait, did you notice those sinks? Fans first noticed the unique design after watching Kim's 73 Questions with Vogue.
So your home is clearly stunning.
Thank you.
How would you describe this home?
I would say like a minimal monastery.
Minimal
But
monastery.
come on, those sinks are next level. Where does the water even go? Well, thankfully, Kim explained everything on her Instagram story on Wednesday. First, let's respect how cool this architecture is.
Kanye, Axel Lavort, and Claudio Silvestrin kind of all did this sink. And Claudio was the one that said it should be separated from the wall because it used to be up against the wall. But we thought it would be cooler this way.
Now, how exactly do they work?
It does actually like slightly slope down that you can kind of see. And there's a slit for the water and it goes in. You can put it on as high pressure as you want and no backsplash will come up.
And wait, there's more. Check out these super.
So how many of you guys have seen this image before? So this is Kim's husband, Kanye, and he's at the GSD. So he's at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And can you see the joy and bliss on the students' faces when Kanye comes to visit them in 2012? He was in the area and he dropped by because he was interested in architecture. But can you see the joy in their faces? Let's go back and really enjoy just how blissed out everybody is. And Kanye himself is also having a great time. And I want to share again Kanye's vision for a building. This is one of the first designs that came out of his studios or his kind of design vision. How many of you guys can guess what this program is for this design? Okay, it is for affordable housing. So the Zen monastery with the floating fireplace, he has envisioned this as affordable housing. Again, more shots of the design. That there is probably a version of a probably $800 Kohler faucet. And again, the Zen monastery look of affordable housing. And what I want to introduce you to now, who I want to introduce you to now is Steve Ramos. So Steve is an architect in Charleston, South Carolina, and he is the author of those images and sort of diagrams that you saw about the architecture of South Carolina, of Charleston. And if you remember, when we looked at the Entertainment Tonight, the ET video with Kim and her sinks, that had over almost nearly 2 million views just in April of 2019. So since then, we can imagine how many more people have looked at that. And compared to Steve, who is trained as an architect, who has the expertise, who's invested in the education of an architect, how many people are looking to Steve as an authority, or to Steve as, how far do we think Steve's voice is permeating into the public realm? Again, revisiting this image of Kanye and the incredibly blissed out students that are accompanying him. Another project recently done by Kanye, have we seen this one? This is another version of affordable housing that he constructed on his property in Southern California. Thank you, TMZ, for the images. And what you see here are these structures which are inspired by Luke Skywalker's home in the Star Wars series. So you see the construction, again, thinking about bent wood, but another approach to affordable housing. And then we see the structures going up, and then we see the structures going down, because Kanye unfortunately did not secure a building permit for them. So the city asked him to remove the buildings. And finally, I want to talk through a couple more examples. Pharrell Williams recently became another sort of designer or artist associated with a housing project in Toronto. And I'd like to, again, play a clip of how he talks about the building and how he presents it to the public.
What's in the name? Who you are, what you do, how you love, what you seek, how you feel. Where you live defies labels. Space is only a backdrop. The experience is you. Live your life untitled.
And again, we see Pharrell Williams in a seminar course at the GSD a couple years earlier, talking about how his synesthesia, which is his ability to see colors through sound, how it gives him a very unique perspective into the design of the world around him, and especially in particular with buildings and architecture. Last example I'll show you, this is something that popped up into my Instagram feed, And it is a multi-million-dollar development in New York City, high end. I usually do a comparison here. Sometimes I'm curious about a comparison because this looks like a lot of high-end developments in New York City, high-end apartment buildings. But it is brought to you by Kravitz Design, which is headed by Lenny Kravitz, the musician. And as you look through the advertisements that popped up in my Instagram feed, you see that there is an architect named Andre Kikowski involved, but there's no picture of him. He's not featured. And it is touted as the art of architecture from the vision of Kravitz Design. And we see Lenny with his other projects, and we understand Kravitz Design to be a full-fledged design firm in New York City with several very esteemed clients. So I want to talk a little bit about shared values, right? So there's something interesting about these figures contributing to architecture and to design. And I think that there's a conflation, or I posit the idea that there's a conflation between taste and expertise and building and architecture and design and styling. And so what is that? How does that impact us? How does that impact the public? How does that impact us as future architects or participants in architectural design and the discipline and the profession? So I, again, look back to HGTV, and what is interesting about HGTV is that it is composed of this kind of, I took a look at the anatomy of ideas or concepts or values that were behind the show. And this was just sort of last summer, Jane Latman, who's the president of HGTV, said that we have a series that appeals to every viewer, family driven, and to inspire, entertain, and motivate. And what's interesting about this is last fall, I tore my Achilles heel, and I went to a lot of doctors to get diagnosed. And in every doctor's office I went to, they were playing in the waiting room HGTV. And I got really curious, and I asked the receptionist, and in one of them, she was a nurse. She thought I was probably going to go up to complain, but I asked her, what's up with this HGTV everywhere? And she said, it's the thing that we play in the hospitals and we play in doctors' offices because it's the one thing that no one argues about. She goes, everyone loves HGTV. Everyone just sits there and enjoys it. And she goes, you definitely can't put sports on. She's like, forget about the news. She goes, this is the one thing that is absolutely safe because we've actually seen people get into fights in the waiting room with other types of programming. So, this is HGTV in summer of 2020, responding to, extraordinary times and reassuring viewers that we can all rely on a celebration of home and family and really inspiring family-driven renovations. So there's this core sense of family that's at the heart of HGTV and its programming. Again, you'll see, I've only included this website snapshot just to indicate down here at the bottom from our family. So HGTV is not only about your family, but they also have their own family. And, what is this family ideal that HGTV is promoting? In a recent article by David Brooks in The Atlantic, he talks about a certain family ideal that became engraved in our minds, right? Sort of, how many of you guys have heard of the nuclear family, right? The idea of 2 parents with 2.5 kids. And we think that to be kind of the essence, the quintessential understanding of what the American family is, or what family should be, right? And so what's interesting about David Brooks's article in The Atlantic is that the actuality of this 2.5 kids with 2 parents nuclear family unit is that it actually was only successful for about 15 years between 1950 and 1965 for a series of other reasons. And in reality, it takes, as we've heard before, it takes a village for families to function. And this idealized version of the American family, of the nuclear family, is actually one grounded in, very strict gender roles and other types of biases. So we have here, again, for some of my faculty colleagues in the lecture, will recognize this as a 1950s sitcom called Leave It to Beaver, really embodying the families on TV, this ideal of the American family, of the nuclear family. We have them again now starting to move into homes, post-war building, post-war development of the suburbs, post-war growth of like homes and housing after World War II, with incredible economic and physical growth. We see this family at the dining table, where the dining table again becomes a kind of emblem of the single family, of the nuclear family. And so when we have debates about how to strengthen the family, we're thinking about the two-parent nuclear family, and the one with 1 or 2 kids and probably living in some detached family home on a suburban street. So again, there's this idea that family equals suburban home equals single family house, especially in the US, right? This is a goal. It becomes not just an emblem, but actually an aspiration, right? And this has all been sort of developed without us even being conscious of it. And so here you have the Leave It to Beaver, you have the Cleaver family, seeing the 2 kids off to school. I'm sure I know that I've driven through or lived in neighborhoods that look very much like this. So here we are in their town, and different shots on set. And here you have a plan in Universal City's Colonial Street of the actual set. So you have the Cleaver house and garage here to the right, and then you have other things that houses the Mummy ghost house, or later the Munsters house up here. But this diagram, or this actual plan of the street, is very diagrammatically similar to what we understand as any suburban development from the post-war period through until now, and it's still going strong. So this is a screenshot from just this last week of Waco, Texas, which is where one of my favorite HGTV shows, Fixer Upper, takes place. So again, you see that fabric, which is really quintessential to the US residential landscape. And so even as families change, or the idea of families change, so here we have the actors and the fictional family in Blackish, or even Modern Family, again, a fictional family that is really challenging the existing conception of the 2.5 kids with 2 parents families. Their house, which is a single family house, which was built for these single nuclear families, remains constant. So this is the house that is the one for Modern Family. And so again, all American, HGTV is at the core of what it means to be American. So Rhonda Kaysen, a contributor to the New York Times, wrote in 2019, she watches HGTV all weekend. It's practically an American pastime at this point. And we have the Property Brothers, Drew and Jonathan Scott, even though they're Canadian, they still introduce a lot of their shows with pictures from their own family, of their mom, of growing up, again, this nuclear family, what it means to be family. Yet again, the physical space, what are the consequences of that, that image? The physical space separating nuclear families has widened, right? So lawns have grown more expansive, porch life has declined. And what has happened is that the family itself has become more and more isolated. So the idea of the nuclear family isn't actually one that's successful, because as I mentioned before, it takes a lot of work for a family to succeed. And another kind of trend that is simultaneous to this is that by the 1970s, Americans really started to view their houses as assets. And I think this is really familiar to you guys, the idea that a house is not just a place that you live, but is really something that is for your future. And this is proven over and over again in that the investment most people make in their homes, the purchase of a home, actually is more productive and has better returns than your own job can for a lifetime. So again, you borrow as much money as you possibly can to buy the biggest house you can, and then you make more money off of that house. And what has this led to? So in the last 2 decades, homes over 2,400 square feet, which in the past only represented 1/3 of new homes, now comprise almost half of our American market. So there's this supersizing of the home because it's not only seen as this emblem of Americanness, this pinnacle of the American family, but it's also seen as the major primary wealth generator for families. And so US homes are roughly 600 to 800 feet larger than those of comparable highly industrialized countries. So here you have 2,400 square feet. Here you have 850 square feet, which is the average size of homes in Levittown, New York, which is the first suburb that was developed in the United States. And then you have, again, the average size home in other industrialized countries, which is about 1,000 square feet. So if you think about Mina's forever home, if we go back to Indianapolis, and we again take a deeper dive into the consequences of these sort of layered symbols, these layered values upon the kind of individual homeowner, you'll see things like this. So to the left, you'll have something that looks like a ranch house. And to the front, you'll have the kind of main house. And so what's in this ranch house segment to the left here, to the left of this yard? So in the back, we see another part of the house. It's actually a hallway. This is a shot of the interior of this space here. It is a hallway that connects the main living house to an attached garage. So Mina's husband, Steve, was really intent in the Indianapolis weather to have a attached garage. So here you see them walking through the hallway to get to the attached garage. And here you'll see a Google map, you'll see the front of the house, you'll see the attachment, and then you'll see the garage here to the back. So if you can see from this quick 3D sketch, I just want to show this to emphasize the effort, the amount of materials, and the kind of cost involved in creating an attached garage, right? And again, this is under Mina's direction as opposed to under the direction of an architect or informed by architecture. So again, based on the skinny lot, this was their solution. And to me, that really evokes this concept that I've been playing with or developing, which is called spatial narcissism. And it's this idea that we're privileging our individual homes, our individual property, but we're building them upon these kind of design values or these spatial values that are not necessarily in consideration of not only the kind of health and wellness or well-being of those around us or our communities, but maybe not even for ourselves, because think about how much money Mina and Steve could have saved if they didn't build this hallway, right? Think of just how much they could have benefited from some even basic architectural thinking or architectural problem solving for their ultimate desire of having an attached garage. And you'll see this again and again on Mina's own block within her own house, this bloating of the house, right? Without any consideration to the houses next to it, which again evokes things like NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard, where communities don't want to see multifamily housing or larger buildings that can house more people because of the shadows that it's going to cast on their gardens or the shadows it's going to cast on the house next to it. And you can see that actually happening. If you flip the camera to the other side of Mina's, this is directly across the street. You can again see the evolution of the older generation homes and then the spatial narcissism taking hold, right? This idea that you're maximizing your investment. But my question is, how are you maximizing that investment? And this is anecdotal. This is here in Ann Arbor in Michigan, where I'm located. This cute little Sears house right here, this nice house from the 1920s, was on my list for houses that my family and I were hoping to buy when we moved to Ann Arbor. But when we got to the site, we saw this next to it. So again, we didn't want to live in this great house in this great neighborhood because of this enormous house that was next door. And again, the bloating, the kind of prioritization of bigger and better, but not necessarily with efficiency or performance in mind. You have the Holt family who received an extreme home makeover renovation. How many of you guys are familiar with the Extreme Home Makeover show? Where they help families in need, and they're gifted with this incredibly large house. The family had to go into foreclosure because not only could they afford to heat or cool or maintain the now 3 times larger house, but if you look, the property's pre-makeover mortgage was $30,000 and now ballooned to over $100,000, not to mention the property taxes. So anytime you renovate your home or you improve your home, your property taxes also go up. So in 2016, HGTV overtook CNN as the 3rd most watched cable network in the United States. So it's only behind Fox News and ESPN. So here you have this was taken in early summer. This was the lineup of shows. Actually, I take that back. This was taken about a year ago. This was the lineup of shows that were on HGTV's rotating schedule. So again, I don't want to be too obvious about it, but I think it's important to take a look at the hosts, who the hosts are, what the hosts are actually, their role as kind of stewards of the built environment, whether conscious or not. So if we take a look at their backgrounds, we can see that 0 of them are architects. They're contractors, real estate agents, interior designers, unknown. Mina went to business school and was waitressing before she renovated her first home. The educational background of the hosts, again, we do not see architecture well represented. And I guess my thought about that again is just how much joy Kanye brings when he's visiting a school of architecture, and to contrast that with the incredible amount of investment that is required in an architectural preparation, right? Not just in terms of time or effort or money, but just the kind of headspace and commitment that it takes to go into the profession and to study the discipline. And again, if we think of these new stewards of the built environment, or these different stewards of the built environment, how does that challenge what we consider to be our role or our place within society as the stewards of a better built environment, or as stewards of what we hope to be better solutions, or better, more beautiful ways of understanding how we inhabit space and how we create the platforms and stage set and spaces for the human condition and human life. So again, looking back to that and contrasting that to a unlearned, approach, and I want to again bring up the legacy of Bruce Goff, because I know he was not a trained architect, and I think that there is incredible value in that contrast, but we are at a different generation, right? Where the scale of these things, where the scales of these messages, where the untethered expansion of kind of the influence of the built environment can be magnified and can rapidly expand. I think the scale of that is so different. And I would be curious after we end to ask you guys about that. So I've got like 60 more slides, so I'm a little off my target here of 1 hour. Do you guys want to take a break, or do you guys want me to keep going? Keep going? Okay, all right. So Rhonda Kaysen, again, our contributor to the New York Times, she spoke with HGTV executives, and the reason why they're so big on open concept is because it gets male viewers. Guys like to watch sledgehammers, apparently. So it's for TV, it's not necessarily what's in the best interest of the house. You again have the hostesses with sledgehammers, you have hosts with sledgehammers, you have owners with sledgehammers, and you have actual scenes where we started to clock the anatomy of the shows, in that we were looking at how much time is actually spent on the sledgehammers, how much time is spent talking about the family and the family life, and how much time is actually spent talking about the building. And as you can imagine, on average, the proportions highly outweigh the sledgehammer scenes and scenes of the family where they're talking about other family things. So again, here you see post sledgehammer bliss. And I want to compare and contrast this to a program called Dream House, which is a home renovation series in China. And I bring this program up because it is not ubiquitous. This attitude, or this entertainment value of HGTV, the kind of script, the formatting of the script, is not ubiquitous across the globe. So here you see Meng Yuan, who is an architect, and he's on the show, and he's been invited to renovate a home in Guangdong, which is a major Chinese city, but he is one of the principals of the architecture firm Urbanus. You can take a look at their website. And the first thing he does in the show is he walks the neighborhood, he walks the site. He is not talking about having a baby or talking about the family kind of drama of the clients, but he's actually looking at the site and he's looking at the context. In the show, you'll see wall sections because part of the renovation is readjusting the acoustics and the light and insulation capabilities of the house, which was built by this current resident's parents in, I think, the 70s. Here you have a shot of a new kind of insulated brick that is going to be a roof tile that is going to help with making sure the top level of the house, which has the best views, which has the best light, is not subject to extreme cold and extreme hot. Again, the residents didn't go into that area of the house very much because it was so unconditioned, but this is a type of modern brick that is based on vernacular building techniques, which we also learn about in the hour-long show. And here you have, an axonometric or 3D model of where they're reinforcing the building with steel. As well as where they're rethinking how the windows are placed to bring light into the very sort of dark bottom areas of the house. Here you see the architect explaining his selection of cladding material, which is based on the surrounding roofs. So here you'll see the original house and then the kind of vernacular roofing, clay roofing, and coloring of the homes around it. And then at the end, the before and after, you have the family doing the same thing, walking through the house, being thrilled by what they see. But instead of being excited about the furniture and the pillows and all the different ways that everything looks incredibly neat and new, they're looking at a view out of the house where the windows begin to frame, begin to act as art pieces themselves as per the inspiration of the architect. And you see the homeowner saying, I've lived here for 30 years and I've never seen this view before. I never knew that I could see this out of my house. And again, the idea of framing using the architecture, which has a very tight, efficient footprint, but that the window itself is doing multiple jobs. It's not just a puncture in the envelope, but it is framing the sky, it is bringing down light, it is creating privacy, but also creating views, and it is acting like a informal art piece where it turns the city into a painting. So here you see the final finished home. And I contrast that because I'm curious, like, where could that happen in HGTV? And so again, I want to look back to the kind of history of what I see as something optimistic in some ways, which is that we are really invested in our properties. We're really invested in our homes in that kind of capital. But where have things taken a turn? And so in 1999, HGTV launched House Hunters. And this is a show, even though I personally prefer the renovation shows, that turned HGTV from being a kind of educational program into what is now known as house porn. And so what is interesting about that is some of you guys may be familiar with shows like This Old House, which was on PBS and helped homeowners understand how to renovate or how to make decisions about things that they were doing in their own homes. But all of a sudden, again, as we mentioned before, as millions of Americans started buying homes on cheap credit, and this is before the Great Recession, before the mortgage crisis, you see people starting to shift their entire mentality at a national level from thinking about homes not as a place to live, but as an investment. So how is this magnifying these other values that have been developed in Cold War America, where homeownership was seen as a means of instilling patriotism? So William Levitt, who is the pioneering founder of Levittown, he has been quoted as saying, "No man who owns his house and lot can be a communist." So again, and this is an article written by Ta-Nehisi Coates in his Atlantic article, which is the case for reparations. For those of you that don't know, Ta-Nehisi Coates also is the author of the Black Panther movies, as well as many incredible books and articles about Black culture in America. So here we have the first residents of Levittown, again, coming back to that idealized version of the nuclear family, of the American family. And then at the same time, these are the same family members that have signed these deeds in Levittown. So in order to become a resident of Levittown, you signed a deed agreement with the developer or with the or with the owner if you became a renter. And I just want to point out here that these deeds and across America contained racial covenants, which have the tenants signing that they agree not to permit on the premises to be used or occupied by any person other than members of the Caucasian race. However, there is a clause that allows for domestic servants who aren't Caucasian to access the premises. And so even in towns like Ann Arbor, here where I am, there still are racial covenants on many of the deeds and founding documents for neighborhoods across our township. They are no longer enforceable, but they still exist. And so how many of you guys have heard of redlining? So again, redlining is the act where cities and neighborhoods were deemed desirable, undesirable, and also led to other biases where certain groups of Americans were allowed to get home mortgages to increase their wealth and others were not. So this is a shot of Indianapolis, and we can see how redlining, which deems certain areas as good ones for investment and certain ones as bad ones for investment, are very much based on racial lines and very based on these kind of exclusionary ideas of what it meant to be a kind of idealized American family, what it meant to be a good investor in the American dream of home ownership. And so here again, you have a 2017 survey of Levittown, which even from its founding in the 40s until 2017 is still upwards of 70% white. And another thing is that, again, this surge has really been transformative and is a phenomenon that is only about 100 years old. In 1930, only 30% of Americans owned their homes, but by 1960, more than 60% were homeowners. So this really created a shift in wealth in America, right? So that middle-class families, which were typically renters, suddenly saw a tremendous shift in wealth through home ownership. I know my neighbor across, like who lives in a house across town, she bought her home in, I think, the 70s. She bought it for $40,000 and it's now worth about $600,000. And again, the splits and the omissions that these idealized visions had which was that the emblem of homeownership wasn't to be awarded to Blacks, and the American real estate industry really believed segregation to be a moral principle. So I think I'm gonna kind of wrap up this section and tie it to this petition that I saw here about house hunters. So it is a letter written by the AFA, which is a family, as they call themselves, a family, an organization based on family values. And here they're writing a letter to HGTV President Jane Latman, and you know, they say to Jane Latman, in the future, please respect the majority of your viewers and their views on marriage. And essentially what happened is that HGTV had an episode, the folks you see on screen there were featured in the February 12th episode of House Hunters, and they were a throuple, a polyamorous threesome looking for a home in Colorado. So even though HGTV is inclusive, and HGTV's statement emphasizes how they feature all home buyers and living choices, again, this idea of home ownership, the idea of family, the idea of who has a right to a home, who has access to a home, how a home is shaped, that is very much a moral issue. It is very much an emotional issue. Okay, so I'm gonna switch gears. This is the last part of this. Are you guys hanging in with me? Are you still doing all right? All right, good. I see some thumbs up. Okay, I'm just gonna take that as a good. And so what this led to in the research was a real examination of the single family typology or zoning in the kind of American metropolis. And this was also inspired by Minneapolis, which is the first US city to do away with single family zoning in their city. That doesn't mean that they're suddenly going to be building multifamily homes or alleviating affordable housing, the affordable housing crisis, but this does mean that the sanctioned state of the single family home in zoning in Minneapolis has been eliminated. Again, Minneapolis has decided to eliminate single family zoning, a classification that has long perpetuated segregation. So since then, some other cities have also done away with that. And I switched here to a look at the San Francisco Chronicle. I think a lot of you guys know, I've heard of the term Silicon Valley. So that is the Bay Area south of San Francisco, where a lot of tech companies have developed in the last, let's say, 40 years, and even more recently in the last 30 years. And what I want to point out here, I'm going to look at my records, is that some of the major revenue generating tech companies are based in the Bay Area. And the Bay Area itself was founded on this idea of the single family house, right? So in the Bay Area, you'll see a lot of these neighborhoods that are completely zoned for single family residential fabric. And you have places like Apple in Cupertino, Alphabet, AKA Google in Mountain View, Facebook in Menlo Park, and Hewlett Packard in Palo Alto. And I bring this up because if you look at this chart, which kind of looked at the rate or availability of single family housing, you see that in Menlo Park, California, or Cupertino, you have total units of housing at 11,861 or 20,715, and you only have 127 units of affordable housing or 366 units of housing, and that you see single family housing throughout Menlo Park and Cupertino as the dominant form up here of house. And so what does that mean? If you look at the population, you can see that it drives down the population. And here on the right, you have Minneapolis and Indianapolis. But it drives down the population. And with the tech boom, you have this skyrocketing real estate, not only in terms of home ownership, but in terms of rental as well. So as cities struggle to keep up with demand, single family neighborhoods have really been part of that equation. They're considered to be this sacred part of our history, of our country. And then again, the example, this is in the Bay Area, you had a single family house that had been sold to a developer that wanted to do multifamily housing. And by multifamily housing, we mean 2 or 3 units, or 2 or 3 different residents as opposed to 1. And it was blocked by the local community. And here you have, again, the Bay Area, the development of the Bay Area. And you'll see that from 1940 to 1960, it's mostly blue, which means new construction. From 1960 to 1980, still mostly blue, which means new construction. By 1980 to 2000, we're seeing some yellow, which means very few new homes, slowing down of construction. And then by since 2000, you see incredibly, you see entire zones which are at the heart of these new tech communities, at these new metropolises being completely shut down. And there's no new home building, there's no expansion. All you have is existing stock, which most normal people cannot afford. So I kind of want to end this lecture or this talk with an idea of conscience. I think a lot about conscience, and being a scholar or a thinker of professional practice in architecture, you know, we're really familiar. I think you guys that have started to take your professional practice courses or thinking about design or thinking about being practicing architects, we talk about ethics a lot. But for me, I want to zoom it out a little bit more into conscience. And I have a colleague who talks about the conscience of the project, right? So not necessarily ethics, like what is my kind of personal ethic, but what is the conscience of the project, or what is the conscience of the building, or what is the conscience of the built environment? If we make changes to the built environment, especially now in an age where we have dwindling resources, where we have overcrowding and huge growth in population, and we have climate change, the decisions we make about the built environment, if they're wasteful, if they're you know, not necessarily as efficient or layered as performative as we would need them to be, they really can, at an individual level, magnify across an entire society. So those of us that were in Marjorie's class have seen this kind of closing example. These both are houses that are known as modern farmhouses. On the left, you have a typical, you know, Toll Brothers house in a development somewhere in the Northeast. And then here you have a modern farmhouse, township farmhouse designed by Lammas, a firm headed by Vivian Lee and James McGillivray in Toronto. And if you look at the house here to the left, the modern farmhouse, and you look at this house here on the next slide, as another modern farmhouse, there's one that I naturally gravitate toward, but I kind of want to break it down a little bit as to why I gravitate toward that. And I like to do this kind of closing thoughts about a window. So in a typical building, you know, in a typical suburban house, a window kind of does one or two things. It lets in light, it lets in air, and it does the reverse of that. It's a passageway for light and air. But when you have a window designed by an architect, or a window that is architecture, you have something that is incredibly layered and considered not only for its capacity to just simply be a passageway for light and air, but you have the architect thinking about the history, the context, the performance, the program, the artistry, the craft, the materiality, the cost. And again, you see that the window here is much more layered, much more intelligent, much more performative, and much more enduring than the window that you would see here. So again, that comparison. And that to me is this idea of understanding architecture as different than a building. Not just because it is more performative, but because of the considerations and the thinking and the work that went into bringing it about. This is a statistic that, again, is a simplification, but is a kind of what I call like a fat pen view, which is that if you have about 100,000 architects in the US right now, you compare that ratio to about one architect per every 3,200 citizens. If we take the population of the United States to be about 320 million. With that, you have a 1 to 320 ratio for lawyers, a 1 to 240 ratio to doctors, and a 1 to 190 ratio for engineers. And the reason why I bring these other professions up is that they are learned professions, much like architecture. And what is ironic is that architecture probably has the longest path to licensure than even doctors and lawyers in terms of education and all the qualifications and internship steps you need to take before licensure. And if we look at that, if we look at the ratio of architects 1 to 3,020 or versus 1 to 45, I'll bet that most of us haven't. When I was younger, I'd never met an architect. My only understanding of architecture were these very generalized notions of architecture. And if that is a 1 to 3,200 versus 1 to 45 ratio, if I take that to the population of Gibbs, that is about, in your student population of about 500 students, you'll have 1.56 architects for 110 folks in construction out of your own student body. And then finally, I just want to end with this. This is, I promise, the last thing. So we'll take a break and this will be over. But this is the 1914 class of the University of Michigan's architecture school. And this is the 2019 entering class. And I just want to emphasize how different it is, and that in terms of our profession and growing our profession, this is kind of like a bonus thought, is that 91% of registered architects in the US are white, 2% are Black, 0.4% are Black women, 81% of registered architects in the US are men. Until 2020, 95% of Pritzker Prize winners were men, and they doubled that number to 5. And of the top 100 architecture firms, only 3 are headed by women. So I throw this in at the end because in order for us to kind of think about our profession, it's not only about the value we bring, it's about communicating that value. It's about understanding how the value of design is not just self-evident, which is something we're taught in school, that it just becomes obvious when it's a good design, but that there are a lot of structures, a lot of biases, a lot of kind of social flows out there that are preventing us from really maximizing the benefit that architecture can bring to society. And my parting thought with you guys is that I fundamentally believe that architecture is now currently a very rarefied good and service. It's more for an elite clientele. And my hope is that it is somehow refashioned into a basic human right, because as we all know, the built environment affects everybody, yet architecture is not able to reach everybody. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate you coming on this ride with me. And let me stop sharing. Thank you. I guess I'm curious, do we want to take a break? Do you guys have questions? I didn't see anything pop up in the stack, but I would love to, have a discussion with you guys. We're not that many on screen. So, and thanks for letting me go 18 minutes over my original estimate. And I appreciate you guys and your patience.
Well, Irene, I have a question to start off with, and then I'm sure everyone else does as well. But one of the things I was wondering, as you're showing us all these HGTV stars and videos, is the question of like, why doesn't our expertise matter? Because when I look at the cooking channels, and like if you go to a Bobby Flay restaurant, like the food is really good, like it's good food, and I believe that those people on the cooking channels like are genuinely experts, maybe with the exception of Nailed It, right? But so why is it that in architecture expertise seems irrelevant?
It's because people aren't exposed to it. People don't have, they aren't exposed to architecture. They aren't exposed to architects. They aren't, they only see it as this, again, really rarefied. And by rarefied, I just mean it's rare. It's not something that's very ubiquitous, but they see it as skyscrapers like I did as a kid, or really fancy houses. And that's out of reach of most people. They don't see it in their daily life. And that's why things like the kind of immediate gratification of the HGTV homes, where you take this like, really dumpy house that has been neglected and you bring it back to life with, these beautiful furnishings. People don't realize that when you lose a wall, or when you lose a door, or when you lose spatial definition, that's actually a loss. And so for me, it's really funny. Like the analogy I have is if like all of a sudden we asked all of our elite athletes, like our elite long distance runners, to start jogging in clogs. It's just, that to me, like sometimes I walk through these neighborhoods and I just literally see the houses not as these incredibly engineered running shoes with the dry fit and the sweat wicking and the hexagonal honeycomb, highly, engineered soles and aerodynamic, whatever. I just see a bunch of clogs and like these big, cardboard boxes, right? And it's because people aren't exposed to it. They don't have access to architects as a population because our profession, our cohort is so small. And it's usually considered a luxury good, architecture itself. So most people can't imagine why it would benefit them. And, partly I would say also it is a little bit of, the fault of, maybe not the fault, like I would say this is more of a call of action to architects and this younger generation, which is that you're able to advocate for it. You're able to really connect with people why architecture is amazing. And it isn't because you're building this $1 million building, but it's because you can think differently about a window, or you can think, you can think more subtly about a kitchen layout. And one of the things I like, where I think HGTV is kind of headed in the right direction, is the Property Brothers. Sometimes they say this, and again, I don't think it needs to be like this total rehaul, but the Property Brothers in some shows, they'll say, because the setup of the show is that people look at homes that they're going to move into and renovate. So the idea is that they shop for 3, then they pick one, and then they renovate it. And then a lot of times you'll see the show, the clients, let's call them, on the shows, and they'll go into a kitchen. They're like, we love this kitchen. And the Property Brothers will say to them, we like this kitchen too because of the finishes, but where this kitchen is not doing its job is that it is a renovated kitchen and it looks great, but they haven't changed the layout. So they just reinforced kind of the original deficiencies of the kitchen. So I think for me, that's where it's headed in the right direction. Excuse me. But again, it's because there's no exposure. There's no exposure to that. And you can see the increase in interest in, for instance, in design. There is a skyrocketing interest in design shows, all of these different things. But if you compare that to actual enrollment rates in architecture, those remain flat. And so again, there's just this disconnect. People are not seeing architecture as the engine behind all of this. Does that make sense, Stephanie?
Yeah, it totally does, especially when I think about the comparison to like the Food Network. Like we all eat 3 times.
We all have great meals. We all have great meals. We've had great meals, right?
Yeah. So we're all food critics, I guess.
But that's the thing. In some ways, I hope for that. I hope that like society, that we can become better like design critics, or we can become like, to me, my dream is that like the regular, person can benefit from like a elevated basic baseline knowledge of architecture and design in the built environment, in the same way that, things like the internet and access to information has made everyone more aware of like health and wellness issues. So for instance, even as recently as like 20 years ago, you would think a massage is something that's just for like a really fancy, vacation for like rich people, right? But now, people know that a massage can be therapeutic, that a massage can, undo scar tissue, and that it's actually something that is part of your health and wellness, in the same way that organic foods is, or less processed foods. All of those things are leading to better information, and they come from, a learned source of information. So again, that's kind of like my dream.
I had a question real fast. I know there's people in the chats, but if there's a certain order to this, I do have a question. Is that okay if I ask?
Okay. I put myself on mute. Yeah, go ahead, Donovan.
Okay. Hey, thank you. First of all, thank you for joining us. As really interesting lecture. I've been curious when the time has come to talk about HTV in a kind of architectural setting. I've been waiting for this moment for a few years.
I'm glad.
It's
really
funny. I think sort of the HTV has sort of been driven into the American lexicon of like, they hold up, and a lot of it has to do with the kind of capitalistic, we watch this because it's on TV, and I don't want to get too deep into that, but one of the things things I'm thinking about, as you were talking and you were showing some of the examples like of, Kanye West's sink and all that. And I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are. And sort of, one of the things I'm thinking about is sort of Bruce Goff, going back to kind of Goff. He used sort of these found objects sometimes, like the glass cullet, for instance. And so there's this kind of relationship that I find that he had with sort of the everyday people in that way. These are objects, a lot of the materials that he's using, a lot of the sort of fixtures and things that he uses, sometimes it's a sort of a raw kind of, it has this relationship that people in society deal with. And I think one of the things about sort of the reason why HTV and sort of the reason why some people in society kind of have this disconnect with architecture is because you do see this kind of phenomenon about Kanye West with his sinks. And so there's this disconnect because they don't really have that relationship. Of course, no one's going to buy an $800, Kohler fixture. That's not really in our sort of purview. So I'm kind of curious in your thoughts on sort of how, and I'm not quite sure if you have any sort of insight to this about how Goff, treated his materials and kind of included that into his architecture. So it kind of became this more kind of holistic that people, had this relationship with his buildings that you don't really find in HTV, and you don't find this in sort of the what we experience today. So I'll just kind of end with that and I'll let you talk.
I mean, I could speak more to the structure. Like for me, that's why I was, curious. Like I'm curious how you guys see how this work fits into, Bruce's legacy. And I think for me, the way the research took me, it isn't necessarily I'm not necessarily focusing on the objects. And I'm really trying to rein it in. I don't know if you guys could tell me, I'm trying not to be too snarky when I talk about the hosts and stuff like that. I'm not trying to be dismissive of what they do. I'm actually really fascinated with the power they have. And again, with social media, it's really funny. Like I have, a couple of research students that work, graduate students that work with me on the research. And there was a time that we were reading scholarly papers on Kim Kardashian and the phenomenon she has. And it's really fascinating because of the way that we're able to connect. So she's able to bring this connection, and Kanye and these stars, like given the social media platforms, they're able to bring this connection, and they have really good taste, right? They have really good taste. They have really good design sense, and those things can't be diminished, and they have really good intentions, right? But I think the disconnect comes when the scale of things is so like out of whack, right? Where their channels for the prioritization of HGTV as entertainment only, again, the whole sledgehammer thing, that's why everything's all, and then also it's cheaper to just furnish something than it is to build walls and to wire things and to put in actual infrastructure into a house. So I think it's when the entertainment begins to override the value or the actual health of the built environment, or when the design and the styling and the desire to, emulate or be inspired by someone who's famous, when those things begin to override the kind of what I would, again, as a newbie to Bruce's legacy, I would see that as something that it compresses that timeline. Like people don't have the headspace to kind of consider these things for themselves, right? There's the pressure for the home to be an asset. There's this real intensity of wanting to be connected to these kind of famous people and to emulate their style and to emulate and connect with what we consider to now be great recommendations. And I think that is, again, a very different era than when Bruce was working, where you could take something that was ubiquitous in the everyday, but you could consider it, if that made sense. So again, to me, it's about how people make decisions and this kind of social structures, the media structures, and the values that are behind them that are driving their decisions, right? So maybe this notion of spatial narcissism wasn't as strong in Bruce's day, but it is something that is hugely part of our society now, and it can spread, like these messages or these ideas or concepts can spread at such a rapid rate, if that makes sense, unchecked. I see Anthony in the stack, I see Angela, and I see Deborah. Do you guys mind, Anthony, if you just ask your question? I always find it's more interesting, it's more helpful for me to hear it from you.
Sure. Well, I was just curious what your take is on that show Grand Designs. It's a British show that's heavily involved with design as part of the process. So just curious.
You know, I think again, like starting, there's some stuff I didn't show in the talk, which is more research we've done into how architecture programming or these kind of renovation HGTV equivalents play out in other countries. And I think, you know, having watched Grand Designs as part of this research, I think it's pretty good. Because it again acknowledges actually the presence of architecture. It doesn't conflate architecture as you know, shopping. I think again, there are shows in Spain, there's some other shows on Netflix where they talk about architecture and they talk about the renovation, or they talk about this kind of transformation of residential architectures through the lens of a more layered, more considered, more thoughtful approach. And so I think for me, it's a really interesting survey to do, to try to review them across different cultures. And what's really interesting is, so previous to this, previous to coming back to the States, I lived in Spain for 10 years. And I remember I had a friend, he was an architect, his name was Santiago, Santi for short. And you know, he was like a handsome guy and we're like in our 20s, and you know, he would tell me that, and this was such a foreign concept to me, but he would tell me, you know, Irene, when I start, like if I date a girl or if I'm like meeting her, we're talking, he's like, I never tell her I'm an architect, because if I tell her I'm an architect, she'll just like go nuts. And the thing was, it's really interesting because while I was there, I also read in one of the major newspapers in Spain, let's say it's the equivalent of USA Today or something, one that kind of cuts across different, you know, across the population. They had a survey that was like, what are the most admired disciplines or professions in Spain? And it was like doctor, architect, and then like teacher or something like that. And there was nothing like lawyer. There was nothing that had to do with like developer or banker or any of that stuff. It was, and I think shows that come from other countries, they just have a different, you know, like if architecture, we think about architecture as a kind of cultural production or a reflection of culture or intertwined with culture. Again, the societal values of different cultures really makes a difference. So that's kind of my expanded answer. Anthony, thank you so much for asking me about that. What do you think about Grand Designs? Do you enjoy it?
Yes, I do. I think that, I mean, although the gentleman who's the host is not an architect, but he is in the design field, but he definitely brings in the architecture side on all the projects. And sometimes they're maybe a little more on the style side, but I think they bring in relevant conditions that should be thought of, especially in terms of spatial identity within how spaces are used. So
yeah, and that's why I like that.
It's good.
Yeah, I think it's good. And that's why I like that show, the Dream House show from China, because I think it really, again, it's not like saying like, here's an architect, like this is better for you, but they just kind of, through the entertainment of the show and through that transformation, that Cinderella story of, you know, ashes to amazingness, they bring about all of these interesting concepts that help people make better decisions or help kind of have people just have different perspectives on their built environment and their capacity to make decisions about it, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Next, we have questions in the chat from Dr. Person and then from Deborah. And if you all don't mind asking the question to Irene.
I'll try. I'm out walking my dog, so I'll do my very best. So I'm wondering, as a means of starting to sort of fix this problem, because I do see it as a problem, what if more architects aspire to get involved in media production? Like, do you see that as one possible way forward?
I mean, I do, but it's really weird because like the thing about media is that they're very much like developers. They just want more of the same, right? So if you throw an architect in the mix, an architect's going to talk about the problems. The architect's going to want to talk about all of these other different things that we're thinking about, and that's not really media friendly, right? I think for me, absolutely, if we could get more architecture into these shows, I'd be super excited. And it's less about the people themselves, right? Like I think early on in the talk, I looked at people's perception of the architect and people's perception of architecture. And I think that there are, obviously stereotypes and really simplified definitions of that. But again, I think the reason why I closed with the question about our kind of professional makeup, right? Who is in our community, is that architects are still seen as these kind of creative geniuses, right? The noble man, the gentleman, the noble profession. And for me, I think if you put architects first, or if you try to kind of get the embodiment of architecture or architectural benefit through the architect, then you're still dealing with a lot of these again, stereotypes that people have. And you'll see that also in some of the stuff that Stephanie and I are able to work on through the Equity in Architecture Education Consortium, is that a lot of young students, especially from underrepresented backgrounds that are interested in architecture, they don't feel like they have the agency to do it. They don't feel like they can be creative, right? They feel like creativity is the domain of someone else, right? Someone that has had more education or is more stylish or has more money than they do. And so I think for me, absolutely, if we can get architectural ideas, architectural concepts, architectural narratives, architectural influences into TV, that would be amazing. But I think at the ground level, it's about students of architecture really sharing, and graduates of architecture, and those of us in the profession, in a scholarship, to really think about how we're communicating architecture, and how we're not just trying to talk to the upper levels of that scholarship or that conversation, but try to insert everywhere we can, a tidbit here and there, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. It also really makes me want to develop like a children's show on like public TV, like how do we democratize the idea of an architect, like for our youngest people who are starting to aspire?
I know there's two things that come to mind. There's like the book Iggy Peck Architect. I don't know if you guys have read that. So there's that one. And then there's like, how do you make a bill, from like the 90s, like PSA, those public service announcements where they tell you how like a bill goes through the legislation and stuff like that. It's really funny that you mentioned that. So part of the research, so some of my students are working on these kind of individualized research projects through independent studies with me. And one of them is right now kind of producing the alternate HGTV show. So what they're trying to do is take a scene from a current HGTV show and then redo it with kind of architecture in mind, and see how that would work. And
That's awesome.
If it dismantles the interestingness of it, or if it actually bolsters the entertainment value.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next we have a question from Deborah, and then from Hannah.
Hi, Irene. I think my question builds off kind of what you guys were just discussing, but so I'm curious how popular the Chinese show was. What was it called? Dream Home? Mm-hmm. And even the other ones in Great Britain, because I have seen some shows in the US where like Frank Gehry was featured or something like that. And so, but they're probably just not popular at all. But I feel like I've seen ads about that. And then if those shows really are popular in some of the other countries, which it sounds like they might be, is it something bit deeper than what architects can do? Is it something about our primary education system? Like, how can we kind of compare across countries? Or do you think that's also an issue? And, Angela was just saying, like, does there need to be, a Sesame Street episode or whatever on architecture, right? And that would go back to like maybe this primary education question.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely, like a lot of, I mean, I'll kind of, if you don't mind, I'll sort of link a couple thoughts together. Like for me, if I think about pedagogy and I think about architectural education, I really see an architectural education, even at the bachelor's level, as the kind of like 21st century liberal arts degree, where you have the humanities, you have history, you have science, you have art, you have math, but you also have space, right? The kind of spatial thinking to me is something that I see as very much a part of a kind of baseline education. And in terms of like the other shows and culturally and like how we can affect it, I think anywhere is game. I mean, that's why I I see practice as a very creative endeavor. So I absolutely see that there are all these different ways that we can do stuff, even through our work, like just how we talk about our work. And again, I think for me, the tough thing is that in education, I talk about this sometimes in some of my coursework, is that there's this invisible curriculum of values and set of values that we kind of lump onto studio, we lump into architecture. And I think examining those and pulling out from those is also really helpful in terms of this kind of reinforcing of architecture as a rarefied good, as a very rarefied service, as something you should be lucky to participate in, right? This idea that you're going to take that free internship at Gary's office because like you're amazing. It's funny because I actually know Steve, who's the producer for those shows. He's in my book. I interview him for my book, and he actually turned to TV when he had a crisis in the profession. It was like during the economic downturn. But again, I think his show, which, you know, if you read about his story, is really interesting how he got there. But the show itself isn't, it's so rarefied again, right? It's such a different model of entertainment as we know it. And I think it really skews from things that people are familiar with or things that people are accustomed to. And you're asking people to like completely move their natural habits or their natural desire for entertainment. And it's like not natural for them, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess, yeah, just as a follow-up, I mean, even the dream home, I mean, Meng is probably one of the most famous architects in China, right?
Yeah.
So so they're still at a really high level. Like whoever could afford Urbanus had a lot of money to bring in this awesome architect to do something really rare. So it makes me wonder, and I also do think that people maybe love to watch shows about solving people's problems, and there's all kinds of architecture that also solves people's day-to-day problems, whether that be like affordable housing and things like that. And it may not be like this beautiful gem of an architecture, but maybe people would enjoy watching like a real like underdog story or something like that.
You know, and it's really funny. I'm gonna like, so I was on this webinar with Jane Latman, who is the president of HGTV. It was through a friend of mine snuck me in the back door to a webinar she was giving to a private firm, which I will not mention, but a big, gigantic, enormous architecture firm. So she was giving a private webinar to their, you know, thousands of employees. And I, again, got a backdoor invite to it and, you know, was squatting in that. And there was so funny. There was an architect who asked the very same question, like, hey, I'm ready. Like, I'll be on your show. Like, anytime you need me, like, I'll be there. And she was just like, and it was such an earnest question from the young architect, which was like, you know, we think through all of these different options. We think through all of these different considerations. Like, do you think that would be part of the show? And you could see Jane, like literally, she's trying to formulate a thought, and she says something like, you know, I just don't know if the audience would have patience for that. I don't know if they'd want to kind of see that, right? And again, I think it's cultural. I think like the reason why even things as expensive as like what Kanye or what Lenny Kravitz or what you know, Pharrell is offering is that people feel connected to them, right? And it's very American, this kind of research that like I've been able to do. It's very much grounded in like the kind of you know, prioritization we have on like shopping and celebrity and all of that stuff. But I do think it's being exported too. So I do think it's being exported across to different countries. And so it's a tough nut to crack. I don't know. I think for me, it's more just even acknowledging that there's a pathway there and that there's this huge infrastructure already, but how do we tap into that? I mean, that's the question that I think is the most creative one and the most creative challenge that I'm curious about. Does that make sense, Deborah?
Uh-huh.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. And then we have Hannah. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, I'm a student. I had a question regarding, you mentioned the like disparity between almost every other profession and then the architectural profession and just how few of practicing architects there are in the world. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned when you were discussing with Angela that like more some students feel as if they can't be creative or if it's like other people's job, but I also think that some of it might be it has to relate to my question of, do you have any recommendations for encouraging students to enroll in architecture, or how do I raise awareness and appreciation of the mundane? Like you mentioned, reimagined windows. I think that, but I don't think my dad would. But and what's your argument for why people should enroll and invest in this? Because it is a huge investment, and I also think like money plays a big role in it. And it takes so many more years of practice with a lot less monetary reward.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think at the very essence, it's, and I can only talk, I'll talk from my perspective. So I'm going to talk through like one anecdote and then just kind of my perspective on this, if you don't mind. So the reason why I think an architectural education is totally worth it is because I didn't come to architecture directly. I was not like a Lego playing person. I was kind of not great at math. Like I just thought all of these things were working against me. And I remember like when I told my parents that I wanted to explore architecture school, I had studied to be a lawyer. I had applied to law school. I was working in a law firm, a very prestigious law firm as a paralegal about a year after I graduated from college with a degree in political science and history and economics. So, and I had taken a couple architectural history courses because a friend of mine was like, hey, we need to take this requirement for like the gen ed requirements. Let's just take one. I was like, okay. And I just really liked it. And I think the thing for me is that the reason why architecture is so worth it is a couple things. I'll talk through kind of two stories. One is that I'm never bored. That's the thing. And that may be a selfish thing, that may be a privileged thing, but that was a thing that I really wanted to do, which was to have I was thinking about how do I want to spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week for the next like 30 years of my life on a good day, probably the next 40 years of my life in a more realistic sense. And I didn't want to spend it doing the same thing kind of over and over. And then also I kind of am a visual person, so I like to think spatially. Like I flourish more in a kind of through visual communication and stuff like that than I do through words. So two anecdotes. So the first one is, and I don't know if I've told this story sometimes in my class, but I had a friend, his name was Mike, and we were both like in our kind of early mid-20s, and he was in med school, and he was just, he's about to get his degree, or he's about to get a specialization. And I was like, Mike, what are you going to specialize in? I was thinking he was going to say something like, like Grey's Anatomy, like cardiothoracic surgery, or like brain surgery, or like deep oncology or something like that. And he was like, I really want to be an OBGYN. And I was like, and I think Stephanie can cut me off if this is like inappropriate for this lecture, but I was like, Mike, why do you want to be a lady doctor? Like, that's so weird, like what's in it for you? And he said, honestly, he was like, for me, it's really interesting because it's at the inception of life. He's like, if I'm an OBGYN, a large part of my work is going to be delivering babies. And that really connected with me because in the law firm, everyone was just like, angry and like stuff was wrong and people were like yelling at each other and there's like all these arguments. And then I was thinking like, wow, architecture is like when people get like they have an inheritance or they move into a new home and or like a business gets like a new building, like that's awesome, right? And I wanted to be on that kind of different side. And then the second anecdote, I told this to Marjorie and I think she thought it was really funny, so I'll share it with you guys. My dad is what you would call a biostatistician. So he does statistics, which is like kind of high level math for like science and research and stuff like that. And I remember this is about 2 years after I graduated from architecture school, before which I didn't tell you this part, Hannah, was that when I told my parents I wanted to go to architecture school, and I, of course, am the child of Asian immigrants, so there's like a strong set of priorities they had for me, but my dad was like, you can't even draw. And so all of these biases, again, these kind of stereotypes. I was bad at math, I couldn't draw, like what was I thinking, and I'd gotten into law school. And so after a couple of years after architecture school, my dad's still like, I can't believe this, like this is crazy, like what are you thinking? And not only that, I'm like off in Europe working somewhere, so he just thinks it's even crazier. And then I come home and my dad's like, okay, I've got this amazing thing for you. I've got this, I want to offer you like a job. And I'm like, what do you mean? And my dad's like, okay, like we live in a split level house. I don't know if you guys are familiar with a split level house, but it's got like half a house, and then half a house. And it's like, basically like you have a kind of living room, garage on one level. And then you have like the main kitchen and living area, and then kind of bedroom. So it's a split level, like from the 60s, typical typology of suburban house. And my dad was like, you know, during my karaoke parties, it's really inconvenient because the karaoke is like down in the family room, right? The family room. And then we have to go through this really narrow passageway to get to the kitchen and the snacks and the drinks. And he's like, and we can't all be in the same room together. So he's like, I've got $100,000. And this is like in the early 2000s, I got $100,000. I want you to expand and renovate and put on an addition so that we can have better karaoke parties, like no joke. And I think it's because, you know, it was like a real important thing for him, right? And the house wasn't working. And so I was like, Dad, why don't you take the karaoke machine and move it upstairs? And he was like, I can't do that. Like, what do you mean move it upstairs? It's the formal living room. It's where the nice stuff is. I can't put the karaoke machine up there. And so I was like, well, you know, why don't you think about that? Like, why don't you see if you do that? Because it's next to the kitchen, it's next to the dining room, and it's got this bay window. So it's actually kind of a nice spot for your parties. And he was like, And so he moved the machine up, and then like I went back to Europe, and then a couple months later he called me and he was like, this is so great. He's like, the parties are so good. And like, he never mentioned the commission again. He never mentioned the renovation again. He was like, you know, he wasn't like, oh, we're going to take out a second mortgage so we can do this and like all of this stuff. And he literally was like, I think he told me this. He was like, he's like, I understand now why the value of your architecture education. So these are kind of two very long anecdotes in that I think for me, I love architecture because I like making beautiful things. Like I'm kind of crafty. I like making things really nice, but that's part of the performative qualities of architecture, right? And it's part of the kind of intelligence of architecture is that you consider how it looks, right? You consider how people interface with it. You consider how people don't just build new spaces, right? Or like have new finishes or build things cheaply or quickly or whatever, but you really think about how people occupy space and how space influences them back. And I think, again, for me, that affects almost everybody out there. So that's why I think, again, that's my argument. And the hope of increasing enrollment is stuff like this, is conversations like this, where people can understand the kind of joy. And then we also, on the other end, I'm working on some research directly with Olivia about how to change our kind of organizational structures in architecture firms. Again, so that's like another day, but that's a lot of research that we're working on right now, is to rethink the structures that we have in firms, which I don't think prioritize the kind of energy, enthusiasm, and intelligence of young designers and recent graduates. Is that helpful? Thanks for coming with me on those anecdotes. I don't know if I lost some of you guys there. You guys are like, oh my God, the karaoke machine, really? But I have to say it was a very meaningful moment for me because it really changed his outlook on the kind of value of my education. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Okay. And then we have Dayton.
Dayton,
are you still with us?
I am, yeah. And I hope you won't mind if I don't turn my camera on for the question.
No, of course not.
So I think my question kind of relates to what was already said with Dr. Person's question and with Hannah's question. But I'm kind of curious, you know, who is it most responsibly given to, the sort of like duty of being an ambassador for architecture? Because I think about like, my coming into architecture, I was a painter, and Zaha Hadid was sort of like the invitation into this. And of course her image has kind of been complicated now that I've like studied architecture a little bit further, but she still was kind of like my entry point into it. And so I guess my question is like, what is the image of the starchitect in your opinion? Like, is it a responsible form of ambassador, or is it maybe more harmful?
You know, I think it cuts both ways, right? Like, I think the simple answer is like Starchitect's bad, you know, like the idea that there are these fancy elitist, like superstar kind of lone person doing the work. And I think the major work that happens in the built environment is like the every person, right? And I think in some ways the best ambassadors for architecture aren't even architects, right? It's people that have learned about architecture or clients. Like it's really funny, you talk to a lot of so I worked in business development, and a lot of things that we talked about in business development, which is like, how do you keep the firm growing? How do you sustain business? How do you get more projects? How do you grow the business, et cetera? Because ironically, all architecture firms are businesses. Who knew? And they like, who knew? And but the thing that's interesting is that in that you realize that the best ambassadors for your architectural design or architectural thinking are those people that have experienced it or that have benefited from it, right? And again, I think the Starchitect thing, on the one hand, I think actually it's more like paper architecture that may have, or the irresponsibility, the kind of cavalier nature of some architects that actually kind of hurt the public trust more, right? Where you start to make architecture even more rarefied, even more inaccessible when you start to layer it with extremely dense, theoretical, hard to understand language, because that privileges a certain type of learning. One of the kind of analogies or things I think about is that, you know, I used to tease my spouse a lot for mispronouncing some words. And the truth of the matter is that, you know, she's like first generation college student in her family, and she didn't learn a lot of vocabulary by hearing it in her family because they weren't, you know, talking in a more elevated way, but she learned it by reading books and kind of learning that information. So again, I think it's the same thing, that there is a certain persona that has been embodied or sort of taken on by the Starchitect, which I think isn't bad in a sense, because if you think about, you know, Kanye, if you think about Kim Kardashian, there is that kind of star power that has incredible might to it. So I think for me, though, it comes down to the responsibility of the individual Starchitect, right? If the Starchitect isn't necessarily like, what are the projects they're going after? How do they treat their employees? What are the ways they talk about the architecture? Do they, you know, talk about it 80% of the time in a more kind of avant-garde way, and then maybe 20% of it they connect back to the people? I think for me, it's more like an individual case-by-case thing. Like I think it's because I see the power in their role, if that makes sense. But one more thing I'll add to that, Dayton, is that I think a lot of architects, we get trained to talk to other architects, and we don't really know how to talk to normal people. And we don't really think about our work in terms of normal people. So again, coming from business development and like thinking about how do we win a job over another architecture firm, the truth of the matter is like most people can't tell. One, because they haven't been exposed to it. A lot of clients are only doing architecture as we currently know it, maybe once or twice in their lifetime, right? And I think the thing is, we're really hoping that it, I really hope that it isn't just, again, rarefied. And I think it just really comes down to getting the word out and not worrying about whether it's a Starchitect or not. But understanding that that Starchitect has a lot of power, and also that our conversation is really self-reinforcing. So for instance, like architecture websites, portfolios, they're all just for other architects. And maybe even at the ground level, think about how your own portfolio or how you talk about your work is different when you talk to your family about it than when you talk in the classroom. Does that make sense, Dayton?
Yeah, it really does. Thank you for your insight.
Thank you so much, Irene. This has been really informative and thought-provoking and also fun. Like, I think, you know, most architects probably look at HGTV and feel some kind of horror and also interest at the same time. And I think you've sort of made this into like a more scholarly conversation for us to all think about the role of the architect as a public figure in society. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys so much for having me. And I'll throw my email down here if you guys ever are curious about anything, you want to chat or like have some thoughts about the research. Like, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts as well. So thank you again so much for having me. And I'm really excited to, that you guys are receptive and that some of these ideas connected with you. So thanks so much.